Oomph. I'm also the clinical director of Fluid Motion, which is a social enterprise based in Oxford, which uses artificial intelligence to create rehabilitation programs for people with MSK and neuro conditions in public swimming pools. I'm also a postgrad at Oxford, reading musculoskeletal science, and my area of research is in aquatic therapy. So here with a few different hats on. So Oomph as a social enterprise, Oomph stands for Our Organisation Makes People Happy. It's a social enterprise about 6 years old, and the original aim for Oomph was to get older adults doing more physical activity. That was primarily in care settings, and over the last couple of years we've evolved to work as much in community settings. So we take a very much a holistic view of well-being for older people, what we describe as our 360 degrees of well-being. So in addition to physical activity, we put a lot into meaningful activity as well. So that's the arts, that's the culture, that's the individual person-centred care, which goes around people's activities in both care and community settings. And last year we launched a transport company, and the whole purpose of that is because as Oomph for a nationwide social enterprise, in over 1,500 locations, that we've created a system of pooled minibuses to enable people living in those settings to get out more often. And this is my mixture of gardens to museums to seaside cafes, and even at the start of the year we started going to the Bombay Sapphire Distillery. So there's a wide range of different outings for older people just to get out and enjoy themselves. But today I'm going to focus on physical activity. So first of all, to highlight the outcomes of an activity, particularly for the older adult population, for the 25% of those that are inactive, that Mike Diper and Andrew Boyd were talking about earlier, the majority of those are people who are over 55, particularly those who are over 70. The low levels of physical activity results in lots of health conditions, increased risk of health conditions, lots of contributing to musculoskeletal disorders. And people are living longer lives, but they're also living more years in disability. And it's physical activity which is a way to really sort of tackle that. There's an increasing risk of falls and fractures, and physical activity is the best way to counter that. But people are losing their independence, and again, where exercise promotes strength and balance and reduces pain and stiffness, we give people back their independence in these settings. But overall, it then reduces their health and social care costs, both in the public and the private settings. This is our target demographic. We're definitely in the over 70 region, not by intention but by design. Within the settings that we work in, the majority of people over 70, a huge proportion over 80, over 85, so we work with the older population. So how do we do it? We train people. We look at the spaces where people already live, we look at the venues that older adults already attend regularly, and then we identify the people working, living, volunteering there, and train those individuals. It's a very customer-centric approach that we take to make sure that we identify where these people are, because trying to get them there is a huge challenge, particularly for older adults. This is a mixture of care homes, community housing associations, faith centres, libraries, churches, lunch clubs, reading groups. Anywhere where older people already live or congregate regularly, that's where we go. The reason we do this is because exercise for this age group is a lot around relationships and trust. When you work and train the people who already have that trust, who already have those relationships, it's much easier for them to start to lead physical activity. And then the reason this is important is transport is a real barrier for older people to get to physical activity. If they have to take a bus journey, or it's a walk, or it's a taxi ride, it's already not going to happen for that individual. And that's why it's important that it's on their doorstep, in their communal lounges, in retirement communities and housing associations, or it's before the lunch club they're going to anyway, because that's already part of their diary and they're already happy to get the transport to go there. And it's difficult to try and motivate an older person to take part in physical activity or exercise just by using paper leaflets, even videos, newspapers, because exercise is something that they don't associate themselves as being able to do or as their lifestyle. Younger people have grown up with the idea that exercise is part of their life. We go to gyms, we will go to Saturday jogging, Sunday bike rides. That's become the norm. But for this generation, that was never really the norm. So trying to encourage them to do any form of physical activity is really difficult. If it's on your doorstep, or it's at the lunch club you're going to, and you see it happening, and it doesn't look like sprinting or cycling or jogging, that's the way we start to coach people to realise what they can do and might want to do, because the emphasis is on my doorstep, it looks fun, other people who look like me are doing it, therefore I'm probably capable of doing it. But trying to convey that through paper, through leaflets and newspapers is really difficult. So that's why it's important to go to those settings. So we train people in a mixture of both seated and standing exercise, and the reason for that is to make sure it's really inclusive, but to adapt to the different needs of older adults. But we work with different NGBs, National Governing Bodies of Sport, because seated and standing aerobics is only applicable and appropriate to a small number of individuals. It's really important to understand that older people have a diverse range of interests, likes, preferences, and being able to offer lots of different sports, games and activities means that you can actually you can get them excited and interested in some form of activity or movement, and by side effect that results in physical activity. It's truly exercise by stealth, but it's gamifying that where possible to get them encouraged in the first place. The 13% is our biggest research study to date, so that was in collaboration with UCL, and by putting Oomph into both care and community settings, it results in a 13% improvement of quality of life over 3 months. It just goes to show that exercise is incredibly good at improving people's health, and unfortunately we're still driven by outcomes rather than outputs. I think the outcomes have been proven time and time again, but we still have to feel we have to prove these outcomes. The most important thing now is outputs. We need to get as many people through these systems as possible because we know the outcomes will happen anyway. So just a quick video to show you what it looks like.
We identified that there was a lack of provision for people who had memory issues, and that by investing in a physical activity offer, we could reduce care costs and increase well-being.
Oomph has given the leisure centre an opportunity to deliver something completely different to what we've delivered in the past.
Oh, I think brilliant. I think every centre should have one.
It's given us the opportunity to work within the community and reach out to the wider audience that need our support.
The Memory Centre have really bought into the scheme and are referring people onto the programme. The guys that we've got coming to the physical activity sessions are finding a real benefit from it.
Some of them, it's the only time they get out of the house each week.
Some actually increase their activity levels through starting within the class.
Olive is our Oomph star. When we first met her, she shuffled along the floor, she couldn't raise her arms above this, and she was quite anxious.
She didn't really have much confidence, and she certainly couldn't walk up the stairs.
Her mobility was improved.
And she has been able to walk up a flight of stairs in her house in 1 go, whereas it used to take her 3 goes.
I take it slowly, but with less effort, pain.
And since doing Oomph, she's now doing exercises where she's swimming, she's lifting her feet up.
I can tell about the improvement. I can feel it, that I feel a bit relaxed now.
The benefits of Oomph have been absolutely massive for Bexley, and you can see that by the fact that people keep coming back.
Just to see people sort of smiling, not saying I've got a class to come to, but actually I'm coming back to see the people that are actually taking part in the class or running the class. They become like a little team, a little group, a little family group, and I think it's just fantastic.
It is increasing people's mobility. They're getting great social interaction out of it, and we actually give them a free cup of tea or coffee afterwards, and it's helping their emotional state as well, because they're actually coming out of the house, it's countering any sort of social isolation, and they're feeling better about themselves. It's increasing their well-being.
From the heart, it is my favourite class of the week, yeah, and I never want to give it up.
So if you combine our care and community sessions, Oomph in the last 12 months delivered over 1 million participant sessions, and what participant sessions are is when one person goes to one class, that's one participant session. So we've had over 1 million older adult participant sessions in the last 12 months, making Oomph the, if not one of the largest provider of older adult exercise in the UK. But in order to do that, we had to look at what the barriers were to run a service like this and what the barriers for older people to take part in physical activity. If you're going to create a solution, you've got to really start to understand what the key parts of that problem are. We spent a lot of time looking at the barriers about why older people do or don't engage in older activity. And the main reasons were they weren't willing to travel far, or there wasn't the option to travel far because transport was poor. There's a real high cost of delivery in a lot of sports centres where most exercise was still being delivered for older people. If there was an older person's exercise programme, it was in the local leisure centre most often, but it wasn't able to get there. But more importantly, even when getting there, it could be £3, £4, £5 for that session, and that's because of the high cost of an external instructor in a space which costs money to run. So So that high cost of delivery became a barrier to a lot of older adults who aren't willing to, they don't see the value in exercise enough to part with £4 or £5 at a time. The exercise wasn't of interest, and there was limited trust or relationships with the instructor. By going into a new setting, you didn't know who this person was, and therefore you didn't trust them. And when you might feel fragile or unstable, having that trust is really important. And this all links into one of the most recent literature reviews on the motivation for older people getting involved in activity. And it's all around social influences, physical limitations, competing priorities, access difficulties, personal beliefs of physical activity and their ability to do so, and the motivation and beliefs, which kind of was captured all in these 5 bullet points. So we knew that we had to work out a way to overcome each one of these. So the way we did it was to work with organisations and local partners who already have the relationship with older people and where these older people live. To then train those people in those settings really well, support them incredibly well, because these are individuals who may have a background working with older people, but they don't have a background in exercise. So training someone alone isn't effective. Training, the knowledge and memory of training tails off quite quickly. That's why all of the training courses, and we can't remember what we learned in the training courses, but we still have certificates. It's the support which embeds it, and it's that ongoing support which reminds people they can deliver exercise, how to do it, why to do it. But by doing that, it makes it ultra low cost. So the average cost of getting an external provider into a care home or community setting, at the lowest you're looking at £20, that's incredibly cheap. The average, £35 to £40 per session. And when we're aiming for 150 minutes a week, when we're aiming for probably 2 or 3 sessions of exercise a week, that's a really high cost to be running exercise. When you train the staff and volunteers and residents that work there, it comes out at about £6 to £7 a session. And that's the cost of training someone divided by the number of sessions they deliver on average. So that's, there's the barriers for older people, but there's also the barriers for making this kind of model, this program work. So historically, older people are seen as a special population. So as a special population in exercise, you need to be a minimum level 3 fitness instructor, which is a real barrier if you're trying to train members of staff who can't be released for 5 or 6 days at a time. The maximum we kind of had was 2 days to work with people. So we've been battling and arguing with the industry regulator for a long time to make them realise that by having to be a level 3 instructor was actually conducive to enabling exercise. It was a barrier, not a facilitator. And it was really important to recognise that the individuals who volunteer or work with older people have an underpinning knowledge which is equivalent to a level 3. What was needed then was just to give them the skills to facilitate exercise within that setting, because they already deal with falls, they deal with health conditions, they deal with heart attacks, they deal with ambulance call-outs, because that's part of their job already. So we finally got this agreed by Active IQ, and they've been our endorsement partner ever since. And then beyond that, getting them trained was one thing, but how do you know that by training a member of staff in an organisation means that that member of staff is going to deliver, that organisation really cares about that person's delivery? There are endless training programs for endless things, and so often there's huge motivation in the first couple of months, but that then tails off. And the reason we do that is, the way we do that, is to align the values of what we're trying to achieve as a social enterprise with the values of those organisations. So within care homes, within community organisations, within housing associations, their strategies, their values are often around promoting health and well-being. So we make sure that what we're trying to achieve completely aligns with that strategy. So by achieving what Oomph are trying to create by having more older people being active, it achieves their strategy and their outcomes too. So when we're both working towards the same outcomes, it means that we're working really hard to make it happen, as is the organisation that we're working with, and that's why we deliver time and time again. So when I joined Oomph about 2 years ago, Oomph only worked in care home settings. So my role when I moved into the organisation was to spin out a division within Oomph to work within community settings, because care homes only represent about 0.2 of the older adult population, whereas housing associations represent about 5% of the older adult population. So there was a huge number of older adults we were really from the beginning to support. And I was responsible for then looking at how we run small-scale pilots in different locations to trial this. There are 7 different locations in the UK, where we start to work with county sports partnerships, local authorities, public health, housing associations. So this is what we've learned in care homes. We know we make it work by identifying the right people working with older adults, training and supporting them really well, and then they will deliver physical activity. Working with these partners meant that we identified the right venues and the right people in exactly the same way that the care home model works. We tried and tested new training resources because we need to train people slightly differently in community settings. And we're starting to introduce the use of tablet computers and software and apps because our old system of collecting information wasn't appropriate for the scale we were working at within community settings. And that meant we just had to learn and adapt and pivot what was our old model into a new model in community settings. Our biggest pilot to date has been in Cumbria, and we had about 100 instructors trained in Cumbria in about 64 settings. But in total, with this pilot that we ran really hard in each location, is about 126 instructors trained. In total in Oomph, we trained about 1,500 different instructors, mostly in care homes. So that was a representation of about 10% of our overall instructor population. So Cumbria was our biggest pilot, and it was a really huge success for us and for Cumbria as well. So in the 64 exercise venues that we identified, that resulted in about 3,800 unique older adult individuals engaging in those settings. The reason it's so high is these were older adults who already lived or engaged with these settings. We were not having to go and promote and recruit new people to exercise, they were already there. That resulted in about 43,000 participant sessions being delivered in Cumbria. The average participant attended about 12.6 sessions. So this wasn't just a one-off introduction to exercise. Because people changed their mind about wanting to take part, it was fun, it was social, it was engaging, they attended for almost 13 sessions. And that means that we're genuinely becoming more active. But the reason this was achievable is within Cumbria we had about £70,000 of in-kind contributions, and these in-kind contributions comes from the housing associations, the care homes who provided their staff time, but also the space to deliver physical activity. And we ran our own EQ5D study in Cumbria, and we found that was almost the same as a 13% figure of improvement of quality of life as we published with UCL earlier that year. So the big challenge we have about scaling up Oomph into community settings is that the system we used to use wasn't fit for purpose. The system we used to use for care settings was we have a really great account management team, and their role is to call our instructors, call the care homes, see how it's going, how often sessions have been delivered. But the problem was this happens every 2 or 3 months on average, and when you're working in the care home, there's quite a good support structure around you. There are lots of staff, there's a manager who will lead and drive that through. But in a church or a library or a housing association, they don't always have that structure and support. So getting in contact every 2 or 3 months isn't the level of support that's needed to make sure they deliver regularly. So we looked at how we can get much better real-time information, and that's when we turned to tablet computers. The benefit of tablet computers is that you can submit reports all day long. So for every single session an instructor delivers, they submit a report. That means that we get a much more real-time overview of who's delivering really well, but who's maybe needing some more support. And the way we can then target support is identifying those who aren't delivering as often, or maybe slowing down in delivering, and giving them a call, giving their members of the team a call, or even giving the organisation, head of the organisation a call to say that this is what's going on, how can you provide local support with us as well. It was really important that we have an offline function. Many care home settings and care settings don't have Wi-Fi, so these are problems we encountered as we were developing it. And the way it's improved now into our new version of the app is that we can send information through to the instructors. So what we found is often is instructors deliver a very small range of different exercise movements. They get comfortable with a certain routine, regime, and they repeat that time and time again because it's too long to go and learn new moves, or they don't feel comfortable learning moves from pictures, and they want to see someone moving to then emulate and replicate that movement. So it meant that we can then start to push through new content, and this is a way that we can broaden out our instructors' ability to deliver a much wider, diverse range of exercises. And then when we're working with different NGBs, it means that their content will be pushed through it as well. Within the 2 days that we have to train someone, we can't train everyone in everything they need to know. So it's really important that we have this interactive tablet so we can push new ideas and new resources through, because that's the way they have a much broader delivery ability. So this is kind of a high overview of what Oomph looks like. So you find out what older people are. They either live in a housing association or similar, or they attend a local community hall or library. And then you have individuals who work or live in those venues. We train and support those people. They're then able to go and deliver exercise regularly. And then using the tablet computers, they then submit reports on how often they're delivering it. Are they having difficulties, struggles? And then using that tablet to then deliver a lot more different exercises. And then we get information back to head office if that person needs more support, and we can also provide face-to-face support. So we'll have our team go over and go and see them, support them, motivate them, give them some training on site. But then the ambition of what we're working to now is to make sure that from these venues, as people get more confident in exercise, more confident in their ability to take part in more active movements, they can then go on and join local groups, whether that's a local walking group, a local volleyball group, or a local bowls club. It's really important we look at this as a stepping stone for people to be more active in the community outside of the setting they already live in. So we've gone for these seven locations for these pilots, and we've now found a funder to enable us to go and work very intensely in the southeast and the northwest of England. We're going to be working with the council's partnerships in each of these areas, because what we need is that local insight. We know how to train people really well. What we don't know is where older people are living, where they are congregating. It's the CSPs and the people who live locally who have that knowledge who can tell us where we need to send our training. We're working with housing associations, as I mentioned, because they house so many older adults. We're investing in that local support. We're having more members of the team on the ground in these regions to not only provide the training, but provide that ongoing face-to-face support, which is so valuable. We're using the tablets for real-time reporting, because when we have about 1,000, when we're working towards 1,000 venues in 2 years, we're up to 3,000 people trained, because the way we work it is to train 3 people per venue, so they can share responsibilities to become a team of instructors. We need that real-time reporting to know where we send our local, regional members of staff to provide as responsive support as needed, when it's needed. Our goal is to get 27,000 older active to move from inactive to active, and this will result in £3 million of in-kind contributions from the housing associations, from the faith centres, from the libraries, for the members of staff time, but also for the use of that space. So for the funding we have to do this large regional pilot to translate into 27,000 older adults inactive to active, it makes it really high value. So the model I've been describing is very low cost, uses the resources of organisations to deliver exercise. It's a really high value, low cost model. So when Mike Dipers was speaking earlier, he was speaking about some of the programmes that were getting people active through the Get Active programme, where it's about a £400 spend per person to get them becoming more active. Through this model, if we hit the target that from our historical data we can hit, it results in about £35 per person to become from inactive to active, which makes this model of exercising extremely cost effective. Then we built in a behaviour change model. So we know that the really important part of getting older adults to take part in physical activity is a lot of them don't feel they have the capability to be active, they have the capability to involve themselves in sports. So it's important they realise they can start by seated. It's very low intent. It can be very low intense. It can be whatever level of activity they need, and over time they can build up to it. But more importantly, it doesn't look like exercise. It doesn't have to look like sport. And working to gamify as much of it as possible means that people are willing to take part because they believe they are capable. Is there the opportunity to put classes on where people live? It's just the opportunity that is on my doorstep. It's already where I'm going anywhere. When they realise that it's something they can take part in, and it's truly just it's no effort to get there, the motivation to take part in that activity. And we make sure there's loads of music, tea and coffee, cakes, and a real social and friendship element that go into these sessions. And that's the reason people want to go and keep going back. And that results in the behaviour. Not the behaviour of physical activity, but definitely the behaviour to join in. Physical activity and exercise will again be a side effect of joining in. It's exercise by stealth again. It's creating interactive, interesting parties that result in physical activity. So we're doing a huge monitoring evaluation around this project, and the questions we're looking to answer is taking physical activity to unconventional settings an effective way to engage in this inactive population? We think it is, but we don't know for certain. Is training those staff and volunteers the effective way of promoting physical activity, or actually is it really important that they need to be fitness instructors, or is it possible that those people working with them are more effective than the fitness instructor could be? What are the key elements to keep both the instructors and participants engaged? In the past, we've had problems where instructors have gone missing, they've stopped delivering, they've been trained and wandered off somewhere else. So how do we make sure we keep them engaged? How do we make sure we identify where the value for them and the organisation is? And how do we support people to use this as a stepping stone to join clubs? What we don't want it to become is a glass ceiling effect, that people see exercise as just what happens in their home settings, because otherwise the reality of many classes is, because there's quite a wide range of abilities, the people at the lower end of ability usually dictate how intense an exercise session can become. So if they believe that exercise is only what happens in this setting, it becomes a glass ceiling, so they can't go on to other exercises. And the role of the CSP in each region is to do that effective signposting, to say these are the opportunities appropriate for you and local to you. And the sustainability at scale always comes down to money. It's how you make a win-win for every organisation taking part. Care, health and housing organisations have a huge older adult population. Staff have time allocated to health and wellbeing activities. So training those members of staff really well, or their volunteers really well, so they can embed activities that promote health and wellbeing, achieves the organisation's objectives, it achieves their strategy. The cost of this for an external person is too high, so by training those members of staff, divided by the number of sessions they deliver a year, makes it really cheap. And that has other fiscal benefits for the care in the care home setting. So for care homes, it's improved CQC ratings, they get better yields, more people, higher occupancy. But beyond that, it's reducing falls. In the King's Fund report a couple of years ago, one fall in a care home, even just a minor fall, not even a major one that results in a fracture, will cost that care home about £1,500 over the next year in additional costs, which which is often absorbed by the care home, not the family, because they're incremental costs, not necessarily directly visible costs. So by preventing one fall, it then covers the cost of this programme by far. And that's why we're able to convince organisations that physical activity is a really important investment for them. And it's the same in community settings. The difference in community settings is that we recommend to charge for the sessions. So in care homes, it's part of what they do. Within community organisations, it's a service they should be paying for. So we recommend to look for £1 per participant, because on the average number of sessions a week that we see, which is around 2 to 3 sessions per activity per instructor, over 46 weeks a year, that results in about £900 to £1,400, which we believe is an achievable figure. We have seen it in certain locations so far. And that by generating that amount of money, that will then cover the ongoing costs of the ongoing training, support, resources, equipment. As a result, is achievable by community settings. The other benefit for housing associations we're just realising is there are employability schemes for every housing association. Employability schemes are looking for training programmes and also options to gain experience. So within every housing association, we found that there's more budget within employability than there is in health and wellbeing. So by offering a training programme that results in direct experience for their tenants to go and deliver sessions around the corner from them in the housing in the sheltered housing scheme next to where they live, means they're likely to volunteer, gain that experience, and then go on to hopefully meaningful work. But that then builds in capacity to have a number of instructors to deliver Oomph in these sheltered housing schemes and extra care settings. Again, it's looking at where the multiple wins are for every stakeholder involved in physical activity. Beyond that, as a business, the way we survive is we've diversified. We've become a specialist in older adults and older adult wellbeing. So we have multiple revenue streams, and in a very similar way that we do physical activity, we do meaningful activity. Again, through training members of staff and volunteers, it can lead meaningful activity sessions and the resources that surround it as well. And the reason that this is important again is as much as physical activity results in health and wellbeing outcomes, so does meaningful activity. Reduces the risk of dementia, reduces the risk of depression, but it follows the same model of our physical activity. You train members of staff and volunteers working and living in these settings is an extremely cost-effective way to deliver these kind of activities that may otherwise be delivered by a drawing instructor or someone leading a music class that would cost £20 to £30 per session. It's much more cost-effective to train the staff and volunteers within these settings really well. And then beyond that, our diversification is into Oomph Out and About, so that we can get older people getting out more often. And again, it was looking at what were the barriers for transport, and the barriers within care and community settings is that minibuses don't often have a minibus. Well, they do have them, they're quite expensive. We had Deloitte run some numbers for us, and on average it costs a venue about £1,800 a month to have a minibus, and that's in either depreciation, lease hire, insurance, governance, the member of staff, petrol, all those things. And it's a really cynical purchase because on average, minibuses are used 3 to 6 hours a month, 1 to 3 trips out a month, so it often just sits on the drive. When we look at the cost per month and the amount it's used, is a really expensive way to get older people out on trips and going on excursions. So we realised we're in this many locations, we've created a pooled solution, and that's how we get people out and about to go and see outdoor spaces. But as a result, because we become a specialist in older people, we're going to diversify, and diversification has meant that we outperform our break even, and we can keep delivering the services that are higher costs, such as exercise.
It was like a magic moment to go back there and see all the cars, the circuit, and the history of the place. It was a wonderful day. Motoring has been my life. For 40 years I was a journalist on Autocar, which was the oldest motoring magazine in the country. I haven't written anything for a long time.
He's taken a lot from this trip. It's actually done more than we thought it would. It's brought back a lot of his old passions, and now he's going to be writing for us.
I'm rather very much looking forward to getting back into the school again.
I think it's just brought back all the lovely, lovely feelings that he used to have about his work, and he was very passionate about his work. This has really, really given him his oomph back.